Living in the Philippines is weird if you're a comics fan because sometimes stuff comes out that you can only get if you buy it abroad. But sometimes things don't ship to the Philippines. So what do? What happens in that case is that you have it shipped somewhere else that it will deliver to, and then a person who lives there is going to bring it to you. So on March 26th, 2025, I flew to another country to meet an old friend who was coming to visit from the US, and he got me something that was only delivering to the US, Canada, and the UK. So, what could it be? Let's open this up and find out. It's the DC Comic Style Guide from Standards Manual. This is the first time in 4 decades that the DC Comic Style Guide, drawn by the maestro Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez, has been reprinted and in its own edition. Look at that. It looks beautiful. It's still in its plastic. I've been waiting to unbox this so that we could all look at it at the same time. So this is a reissue featuring the legendary art of Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez, reproduced at a 1-to-1 scale from a rare original source, first published by DC Comics in 1982. The introduction is by Paul Levitz, the former president of DC Comics, plus inside the DC Comics Style Guide, an interview with Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez and Mary Mobus Yedlin by Dan Greenfield of 13th Dimension, which is an excellent website and that you should all go visit. So, Standards Manual, DC Comics Style Guide. Let's open this up. And for that, I brought along my trusty Tressa knife, Sinag. Gotta be careful, gotta be careful, gotta be careful. There we go. So now that we have it open, and got a little book jacket right here so you can actually see what's right under this. So now that we have this open, we can take a look at the back cover. Look at that. That's gorgeous. So, Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez, not the most famous DC artist of all time, but Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez might be the artist whose work is best known to the world out of all cartoonists. And why is that? Because his work is on all the DC merchandise. So I know that there's competition there from people like Charles Schultz, whose work is all over merchandise. Peanuts, Jim Davis, obviously. But for comic books, I don't actually think it comes close. No work appears on more comic book related product than Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez. And a lot of that is from this book because in 1982, he was known as DC's secret weapon. So Joe Orlando actually called him DC's secret weapon because this was a time before the internet and everybody had, because this was a time before the internet and Facebook was not around, social media wasn't available. You couldn't just get anyone's emails. And Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez was a guy who DC knew, and his phone number wasn't well known. Everybody knew the art, but not a lot of people knew the artist. And that's why he was DC's secret weapon, and then they set him to work by creating the DC Comic Style Guide, which became the guide for every artist to follow. All right, let's open that up. The paper stock is really shiny, really pleasing. Oh, there you go. This is the, oh wait. So there's an about this book over here, and over here we have the first of 2 copies of the DC Comic Style Guide owned by Standards Manual. The cover is dated 1984, but the majority of the pages inside are marked 1982. So this is the 1982 cover edition of the Style Guide, and it contains 9 additional pages that were not in the 1984 binder. So the Style Guide was originally in a binder, which makes sense. DC Comics staff back in 1982, and an intro by Paul Levitz, which I will read later on. Okay, and here is an interview with Dan Greenfield of 13th Dimension. You guys should go visit that website. It's pretty cool. And over here, some Garcia-Lopez artwork. Garcia-Lopez, you know, my biggest compliment to him is this. He is the first time I realized that your favorite doesn't actually have to be the best. Because my favorite artist ever is George Perez, who draws a lot like Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez. And he's still my favorite artist ever. I have a 5-hour video with people giving tribute to George. But, you know, the thing is, just looking at it up and down, even the comics, even with storytelling, Garcia-Lopez is better. He's just a better artist. I don't know how to explain it. And it's just, when I also speak to artists, I do think he is one of a few people that almost everyone universally holds in high regard, in a way that they don't for other artists that fans love, which is very interesting to me. I think that makes him an artist's artist. So as much as I enjoy his work, so you can see here some style guide illustrations along with our color guides. Interesting choice, by the way. So as much as I do enjoy his work, I do think he's an artist's artist in the sense that I think that artists see things that he does that people who don't draw don't see, and that's what they appreciate. Well, look at that. Interesting choice of groupings here. So Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman are with Captain Marvel, the one that says Shazam. At the time, DC was just a few years away from having acquired the license to publish Captain Marvel comic books, and also another few years away from just buying that property and all of Fawcett Comics outright. Followed by, and of course, Captain Marvel was the most famous superhero of the most famous superheroic age of comics, which was the Golden Age, outselling all of those guys at the height of superhero comics. And underneath, we've got the Flash, Hawkman, Plastic Man, Green Arrow, and Supergirl. Interestingly, Green Lantern doesn't show up until the third row. I think that's pretty interesting. So these are the color tones that the color guides that they use, and the color substitution chart. Interesting. This is also, I guess, interesting from a very technical perspective to see how colors were done back in the day. So over here you've got the Justice League mostly at the time with the Marvel family, Junior and Mary Marvel, with some kiddie versions of the Justice League. That's interesting. And the Atom. The New Teen Titans over here, the hottest book DC had at the time, and the villains. A letter from Mary Moibus, the licensing director. And now, look at that. So they replicate the binding, the 3-hole punch, the binding, the very brief summary of the character, and that is when we get to the model sheets. I love these so much. You know, I mentioned it earlier. I think the other biggest compliment that I can give Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez is the fact that despite people like Gary Frank having drawn Superman, Kurt Swan having drawn Superman, George Perez, Dan Jurgens, or despite people like Neil Adams having drawn Batman, this is amazing. Look at that. Having drawn Batman, George Perez on Wonder Woman, obviously. When I think of DC Comics characters, I think of Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez's version. I love these so much. These are iconic poses. That is that's an iconic flying pose for Superman. I did ask Jose once about, I have an interview with him on my website, on my old website, but I did ask him once about what goes into an iconic pose. So how does he pose, for example, Superman and Captain Marvel, or say, yes, that's it, that's them, that's the image that should go on the backpack. It's great. And he said, most of these characters, at least the big ones like Superman, Wonder Woman, or Batman, were around before I was born. So we are not working in a vacuum. Look at that logo texture. So that's very Will Eisner-esque. I love the design work on this. You know, it's not just an illustration of Superman. There is design work going on here. The drawing really comes together as a whole. So it's just really pleasing to look at. So he says, we already know what poses work better according to the characters' personalities. Anyway, the rules governing these pieces are different from the comic books. They are not directed to a regular comic fan, but to a more general audience. One that is not familiar with the latest changes in comics and looks at the characters as something not different from a Coca-Cola logo. For instance, this is one of my favorite images of Superman. Usually, he says, I do at least 3 sketches for each pose, and the art director, merchandising manager, and a bunch of other people have the last word over what pose is going to finish. I also asked him that I've noticed that some of these pictures that he's done incorporate words and logos, and I asked him about that as well, and he says that the only pieces that I did integrating lettering and design elements were the ones that I did for the first DC Style Guide in 1982. I presented those layouts as a whole, and they were approved without any major alteration, because obviously, why would you? Why would you alter anything this man does? Look at that. Nowadays, I concentrate only in the poses, and then they are used with different backgrounds and graphic designs. Mostly digital in the last decade. Hands up if you think Superman should be on his supercomputer more. Okay. Superman's Fortress of Solitude, the Supermobile. So the Supermobile was an attempt at having a toy, giving Superman a car. Obviously, that didn't really take off. You can see the little fist over there. But obviously, that didn't really take off because why would Superman need a flying car? This is, for me, when I think of a Superman iconic pose, this is one of the most iconic that I can think of. And this is also a go-to pose for Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez, in the sense that you will see this pose multiple times in the course of the style guide, not just for Superman. I love that. I love that. Here's Lois. I think Lois is the only supporting character who has her own set of sheets here. This is pretty cool. And that is because Lois is the greatest supporting character of all time. Supergirl's right here. Supergirl's got that little headband thing that she wore in Crisis on Infinite Earths. That didn't really last, but it is a bit of a time capsule. So I think they're all going to get one of these things. So you get to see the front, the side, and the back. Supergirl's cape is transparent so that you can see what her costume looks like in the back. Kara Zor-El, the last daughter of Krypton. Oh, okay. So here's some fighting pieces. Some of you have seen this. If you grew up reading comics in the 80s, some of you have seen some of these in ads. And not all of them, though. I personally didn't see these two. Oh, Lana Lang actually has one. I don't think I've ever seen these before. So this was a time when Lana was significantly more prominent. Hopefully, she'll be more prominent again, because it is always a shame to me when a character used to be prominent and then people don't really know what to do with that character. And now we get to Batman, because, believe it or not, kids, there was a time when Batman was number 2. And that time was before 1986. And Robin. At the time, you couldn't say Batman without saying Robin, so... And here's also Batgirl. Um, Batman's villains. This is before the Killing Joke, so the Joker is still the clown prince of crime, and the Penguin still has his trick umbrellas. That Riddler costume makes me laugh. I don't really know why. That is a pretty cool piece of design. Both of these, I think. Look, Smiling Batman. That's a rarity. I love these. I love these transformation ones. These are great. And obviously you can't do Batman in a flying pose, but you can always do him swinging in. And this is an iconic Batman pose, similar to that Superman pose, the flying pose I told you about earlier. So this is an iconic Batman pose. I think a lot about this pose whenever I think of Batman. And this is also another iconic Batman pose to me. Weirdly, Batman just standing around with his hands on his waist is not an iconic Batman pose to me. I think of Superman more when I think of that. And man, that's just a perfect Batman. That looks great. I'm going to spoil it for you guys right now. A lot of my commentary about Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez artwork is going to be, it looks great. And Robin, the Teen Wonder. There's not a lot of times that Robin went by the Teen Wonder, and it was right before he became Nightwing. So, that's a time capsule. Batman and Robin. Batman and Robin. The Teen Wonder. Oh, look at that. Big money shot of Batman and Robin. Presumably, over here, you would put the logo of whatever it was you were trying to sell, I guess. That's what I imagine that would be for. He really did not need to go all out with his style guide like this, with all this design work. But, you know, that's, I think, what makes this style guide so legendary. Is it's just pleasing to look at. Look at that. Robin and his motorcycle. You'll notice his logo is in that stylized Robin logo that's been used since, like, I want to say 1989. But just a regular R, because that was his regular costume back then. They're his villains. Does Batman have the greatest villains of all time? I'm gonna say no, but I can see why you would think that. And here's Wonder Woman, Princess Diana of the Amazons. So this was a time when she was still Diana Prince, and she would just use her lasso to transform. Or she would do the little spin around thing like Linda Carter did. Here's Diana and Steve Trevor. When Diana was relaunched after the Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1987, George Perez gave her significantly more curly hair, which I do kind of associate with her more than the straight hair, but that's just confirmation bias, really. These are great pieces. It's just really nice to look at. Look at that. He did not need to go all out. He even did the stars. Do you know how hard it is to do stars in a black and white line drawing? It's not easy. Look at that. He even did that. That's not easy either. None of this is easy. He just makes it look easy. Oh, right. At the time, Wonder Woman couldn't fly, so she was using her invisible jet and just kind of jumping out of it. She can fly now. And I think see, there's that flying pose I was telling you about. He does like this pose a lot. Mostly it is associated with Superman, but Wonder Woman does it as well, and you'll see it at least one more time in this style guide. Don't really know the significance of the rose, but here's the cheetah. I guess the cheetah is Wonder Woman's premier villain. To me, it's always been Cersei and Ares, but I guess the cheetah's been the one who's been most known for being associated with her. And now we are at number 4, Shazam. So, how big was Captain Marvel? I told you he outsold Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and had spin-offs in the golden age of comics, which was the most successful time for superhero comics ever. But in 1982, well, no, maybe a couple years later, in 1984, when Michael Jordan was drafted to the NBA, his original nickname before they called him his Airness, there's that flying pose again. His original nickname before they called him his Airness and before they started saying Superman is in the building was Captain Marvel. So Captain Marvel was still really huge at the time, and I do believe at this point in time he had a cartoon on the air which was produced by Filmation. Love that. Love that. I love that. I don't say this a lot, but my actual favorite DC superhero within the DC universe actually is Captain Marvel, followed by Superman. It's very close, but if I had to pick, I would, all things being equal, I would rather read a Captain Marvel comic book. It's too bad about the movie. That's great. Oh man, that is great. The only thing that I'm sad about is that they used the skin tight Captain Marvel outfit instead of the military vest, because that is my preference, the military vest Captain Marvel. And now we are at the Justice League of America, and you have definitely seen this picture, because this picture is used in a lot of Justice League merchandise. I'm not so sure about this one. Interestingly, Wonder Woman is the one in the middle. It's usually either Batman or Superman. Design-wise, Wonder Woman is the correct choice. Why? Because both of these guys have capes, and it's nice and symmetrical when they're going, in opposite directions. Wonder Woman has a lasso, so it rounds it out nicely. That's not an intended pun, but I will own it. For whatever reason, this one is upside down. Here's some more Justice Leaguers: Dr. Fate, Green Arrow, Firestorm, the Martian Manhunter, and the Red Tornado, who is the original Airbender. You know what? I don't think this is Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez. It does look different. This is already 1984. This is already a couple of years later. Whereas this here was still 1982. So this might have been the last one. What would happen is they would trade in and out some of the loose leaf pages to kind of modernize the references. I'm not exactly sure who drew this. The style looks familiar, but I can't quite place it. Anyway, let's keep going. Whoever did that also did this. And I wish I could place it, because it is on the tip of my tongue. That's a weird looking Firestorm here right there, though. So here's some text. It is interesting that somebody like Green Lantern and the Flash, they don't merit their own big text box and section thing. the way that Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Captain Marvel do. But that's the difference between being a comics fan and being somebody who's only familiar with these characters because of their presence in pop culture. But Aquaman over here, we're back to 1982, so this is Jose Luis again. And Aquaman and Mera and Aqualad, more of them, more of the three of them. Here is the Flash, and of course he's shown running. And man, that he really did not need to do that. That is just really nice to look at. All of these straight lines. The Crimson Comet, I keep forgetting that sometimes he is called that. The Scarlet Speedster is what he's more well known as. And here's more of the Flash. Green Arrow. Here's a Green Lantern. I suppose he's the Green Lantern. He's not my preferred Green Lantern, but that is who he is. Hawkman, Hawkwoman. Oh, there's Firestorm. I love how the Winged Wonders get their own logo. Firestorm, more Firestorm over here. This is 1984. Again, I don't think this is Jose Luis anymore. And here's Dr. Fate, the Red Tornado, the Martian Manhunter. Definitely not him, I think. And here's, we get to the new Teen Titans in 1986. And, oh no, this is just Cyborg. Here's Samurai. This is from Super Friends. I'm not sure who Cyclotron is, but, you know, the Golden Pharaoh. These are some pretty obscure ones at this point. Here's Mr. Miracle of the New Gods. So some of these are no longer Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez, but, you know, let's just keep going. Orion of the New Gods with a weird costume. And I'm glad that they've never used this again. But he does look like a character from Masters of the Universe, which, if you've never looked up the connection between the New Gods and the Masters of the Universe, go Google that. It's pretty cool. Mr. Freeze. Not the Victor Freeze that we would come and know later to love, but this is the Mr. Freeze that was originally in the Batman comics that was eventually killed off to make room for Victor Freeze. And now we are at the new Teen Titans. The biggest book that DC Comics had at the time. And you know what? I think this is George. I might be wrong, but I think this is George Perez. I'm pretty sure this is George Perez, actually. So George and Jose Luis drove similarly enough that it's even a super fan of George's like me can get confused. But I do think this is George, and this is early George. I do think George got way better later on, and I still think he was great here, but I think he got way better later on. And I do not think that the height of George Perez's powers is what a lot of people think it is. But it is pretty cool to see some George Perez artwork in here. This is definitely George. That is pretty cool. That is a pretty cool thing. I definitely, in a book with Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez artwork as the spotlight, I definitely did not expect George Perez artwork. And that is a nice surprise. Interestingly, Plastic Man gets his own section. Plastic Man at the time had a cartoon out, I believe. But also, Plastic Man was one of the biggest comic book characters in the history of comics. And I do not know how to emphasize that because he really was one of the game changers in the Golden Age. And now here's superpowers. So this is more merch. The Super Juniors. I am actually unfamiliar with them, although there have been many attempts at doing cute little kiddie versions of the Justice League over the years. Batman Jr. and Robin Jr. We're almost at the end here. Wonder Woman Jr. Here's the rest of the Justice League Jr. This one says combination of signs. So got these guys. Yeah, this is Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez again. So I think the greatest story about Garcia-Lopez, and I'll tell it to you guys as we go through this, what I think is the last section. The legendary European artist Mobius looked at his work and said, this Garcia-Lopez, he uses models, no? And when Andrew Helfer, DC editor at the time, pointed out that Garcia-Lopez did not, in fact, use models, the legendary Mobius just exclaimed, son of a bitch. And I think that is one of the highest compliments that an artist can give to another artist. Some odd pairings here, like Superman with the Hawks. Not Green Lantern and Green Arrow, obviously. The world's finest team with a Flash. Wonder Woman and Wonder Girl, obviously. That makes sense. Superheroines of the 1980s. Wonder Woman, obviously leading the pack. Hawkwoman, Hawkgirl would become a much bigger character later on in pop culture, but I do think that next to Wonder Woman, the most famous people here are obviously Batgirl and Supergirl. The Black Canary, though, underrated to this day. Zatanna, unfortunately, in her 1980s outfit, which I don't really think anybody loved. Oh, here are the villains. I don't know what Luthor's doing there. That's pretty funny. Maybe sneaking around. Here are the Super Friends. If you're wondering why they're drawn differently, it's because they're meant to match the cartoon. And DC superheroes. Just the way I remember them. And the way they live in my head. And that is a DC Comics Style Guide. Thank you for joining. Please click like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to our Patreon as well. I appreciate you guys coming in and watching me flip through this book. And man, if you haven't been following Jose Luis Garcia-Lopez on social media, I would strongly suggest you do it. It's always a treat.